someone telling me that the bestial version of the Wendigo, with the skull head and antlers, is actually the Wechuge, a cannibalistic creature from the mythology of the Athabascan or Dene peoples. And tonight I've decided to read what I've gathered so far over the years. Stories about Wechuges, or at least stories that sound like they're about them. Now, I was about one story short of a full script, so this episode's going to be between 45 and 50 minutes long. Forgive me, I'll make it up on the next one. For now, enjoy. This is Unexplained Encounters, and I'm your host, Darkness Prevails. And these are allegedly real encounters with the Wechuge. Don't forget to send me your scary stories of the unexplained at darkstories.org. Follow and review Unexplained Encounters on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And pre-order a copy of Creepy Campfire Stories on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or go to creepycampfirestories.com. Thank you. Now, let's begin.
This holiday, Verizon is helping you bundle up incredible gifts and savings. You'll get the latest phone with a new line on My Plan, and a brand new smartwatch and tablet. No trade-in needed, even on our
Uncle Roy and the Wechuge. From Whoops. My Uncle Roy died last spring. His liver gave out, which surprised nobody. The surprising part was the box of journals they found in his cabin near Fort Chipewyan. 40 years of entries, most barely legible. They had whiskey stains on half the pages. Mom asked me to go through them, see if there was something worth keeping before she burned the lot. Drunk ramblings mostly, complaints about his back and the government, the price of gas. But the winter of 1987 was different. The handwriting was steadier there, the entries longer and more detailed. It was like he needed to get it down right, even though he clearly tried to forget it for decades. It was early February. He'd gone ice fishing with his friend, Terrence Pelletier, out on Lake Claire, about 4 hours by snowmobile from town. They'd been going to the same spot for years, a little pressure ridge where the lake ice buckled up, creating a natural windbreak. A great spot for lake trout, if you could drill through 3 feet of ice to reach them. The first day was pretty normal. They set up the portable shelter and drilled their holes, settling in with coffee and sandwiches. They caught a few decent trout. The only thing, Roy wrote, was how oddly quiet things were that day. How windless it was, which was unusual for February. He wrote it was so odd that they found themselves whispering their conversations. That night in the shelter, Terrence mentioned seeing someone else out on the ice earlier. Way off to the north, just a dark figure against the white. Roy hadn't seen anything, but Terrence insisted. He said whoever it was had been moving real strange, and by that he meant, instead of walking, it looked like they were sliding. They talked about who else might be out here. The lake was huge, and there were lots of good fishing spots, but most people stuck closer to town in the winter. 4 hours out was serious back country. Could be someone from one of the villages up north, Terrence suggested. Some of the old-timers still ran trap lines out that way. The second day, they both saw him. Or it. Roy couldn't decide which word to use, even writing weeks later. It was maybe a kilometer away, moving along the shoreline. They discussed whether it was a bear at first. The size was right, and it was dark against the snow. But bears didn't walk upright like that. Not constantly, and they sure as heck didn't move that smoothly. Roy wrote that it looked like someone skiing almost, with the way it glided. Except there were no poles, no skis, just this huge figure sliding along the ice like it was greased. Terrence wanted to snowmobile over to see who it was. Roy talked him out of it, said it was a bad idea. They didn't know who or what it was, and whether or not it was dangerous. They watched it until it disappeared behind a point of land. They spent the rest of the day fishing with one eye on the horizon. The fishing was terrible. Neither of them could concentrate. They packed up early, heading back to the shelter before dark. That night was when things got bad. Roy wrote that he woke up around 2 a.m., needing to relieve himself. He crawled out of his sleeping bag and unzipped the shelter door. The moon was almost full, bright enough to cast shadows on the ice, bright enough to see the trail of footprints that circled their camp. They weren't footprints exactly as he looked closer. Looked more like drag marks, as if someone had been pulling themselves around their shelter with their hands, legs trailing behind. The marks went around and around, spiral pattern getting closer with each pass. The closest ones were maybe 10 feet from the shelter wall. Roy woke Terrence quietly. They loaded the rifles they brought for bears, sitting there in the dark shelter and listening. There was nothing for an hour. Then, just as they were starting to relax, they heard ice creaking. Not the normal settling sounds, a rhythmic creaking. Someone was approaching. Something brushed against the shelter wall then. The whole structure shook. Terrence started to unzip the door to look out, but Roy stopped him. They waited, hardly breathing. There was another brush against the wall, harder this time, then nothing. They didn't sleep the rest of the night. At first light, they went outside to check things out. The drag marks were still there, but now there were other marks too. Some handprints in the snow that didn't look human. The fingers were too long, and everywhere the hands had touched, the snow had been melted and refrozen. How could something out here be so hot? They should have left then. Roy wrote that he knew they should leave, that whatever guardian angel he had was begging him to just go. But Terrence insisted that they were just being stupid. They were afraid of shadows. At worst, it was a hermit trying to scare them off his favorite fishing spot. They had driven 4 hours to get there. Might as well get one more day of fishing in. So, they stayed. They drilled new holes closer to camp, kept the rifles loaded and close, tried to pretend everything was normal. Around noon, Terrence's line went tight. Not the steady pull of a trout. This was violent jerking, like he'd hooked something huge. He was laughing, excited, and working that rod as best he could. And then the line went slack. He reeled in fast, swearing up a storm, saying that this was going to be his one that got away.
'Twas the month of November, and all through Bob's stores were weekly unboxings of savings and more. I'm talking unbeatable.
But there was something on the line still. Not a fish. There was a hair. A long, black, human-like hair wrapped around the hook, frozen into clumps. That's when they truly saw it for the first time. It rose up through one of the old fishing holes from the day before, maybe 30 yards away. Roy's description took up 3 full pages, like he needed to record every detail to prove to himself it had been real. It was a man, and then it wasn't. And whatever it was naked, despite the killing cold. Its skin looked frozen, blue-white, with patches of black frostbite. Or maybe not frostbite, because the black areas moved, or maybe pulsated. It stood about 7 feet tall at least, and was thin, with ribs showing through awful skin. Its hair was matted and frozen and hanging down its back. The face was the worst part. Human features that had been stretched and pulled tight over a skull that was much too large, and eyes that were too white, with no iris, no pupil, as if even the eyes had frozen solid. And the mouth, Roy wrote. The mouth never closed. It just hung open, jaw distended, ice crystals forming and melting on blue lips. It stood there, water running off its body and freezing instantly when it hit the ice. It watched them, swaying slightly, then made an odd noise like it was trying to speak. Roy said it sounded like someone talking through broken glass. Whatever whatever it said, Terrence understood something in it, because he dropped his fishing rod and backed away toward the snowmobiles. The creature moved then, dropping to all fours, and it came at them across the ice. That same sliding motion from before, but now they were horribly close. It pulled itself forward with those long arms, its body dragging behind way too fast. They ran for the snowmobiles, got them started, a miracle that they started so fast in the cold, and they took off. Garrett looked back once and saw it following, looking like some massive broken spider. He wrote that he could hear it over the engine noise, a laughing or crying sound of some sort, maybe both at the same time. They made it back to town. They told everyone what they saw. Terrence soon after sold his ice fishing gear and refused to go back out. About 5 years after that, he died in a car accident. But Roy wrote that Terrence had called him the night before he died, said he'd been having dreams about the lake, about something under the ice waiting for him. Roy actually went back one summer. He took a boat out to where they'd camped. The pressure ridge was gone. Ice formations never last season to season. But he found something else. There were bones scattered along the shore. Not animal bones. Too big. Looked human. Some had teeth marks. He didn't write what kind of teeth left marks like that, though. The last entry about that winter was short. Roy had talked to some people, some elders in the town. An old Cree woman told him about the Wet'suwet'en, people who ate human flesh in winter and became monsters. They would be cast out from their villages, but they couldn't die. The hunger and cold would transform them into something else. Something that lived under the ice, waiting for fishermen, trappers, anyone alone on the lake. She told him he was lucky. The Wet'suwet'en had been playing with them. When it was really hungry, she said, you would never see it coming. They would just find a hole in the ice where someone used to be. These are the stories my grandmother used to tell. From Anonymous. My grandmother Eva was Cree, from northern Alberta, and she had this way of telling stories that could make you forget where you were. Growing up, my cousins and I would spend summers at her place near Lesser Slave Lake, and every evening after dinner, we'd gather around her old wood stove while she shared tales from her childhood and the stories her own elders had passed down. She must have told us hundreds of stories over those summers. Most were teaching stories, clever rabbits outsmarting wolves, or cautionary tales about respecting the land. But there were these 4 stories she only told us once, all on the same night when I was 12. It was late August 1998. I remember that clearly. And there were 5 of us kids there. Me, my younger sister Melanie, and our cousins Trev, Krishy, and Meryl. The first 3 stories that night were different from her usual ones. A bit creepier, I'd say. The first was short, about 5 minutes, about this trapper who got lost in a blizzard and followed what he thought were human footprints, only to realize too late they were walking in circles, and whatever made them was no human. The second was longer, about a whole family that disappeared from a fishing camp, leaving behind only their clothes laid out perfectly, as if they had just vanished from inside them. The third story took maybe 20 minutes. It was about these 2 brothers hunting moose in early winter who found a camp that should not have existed. Fresh fires still smoking, food half-eaten, but covered in frost like it had been frozen mid-bite. They ran when they heard something massive circling their own camp that night, breathing like a windstorm. But it was the 4th story that struck me. I swear Grandma Eva's voice changed, like she was bracing herself. I remember her looking at the windows repeatedly, even though the curtains were drawn. "This happened to my Uncle Joseph," she began. "Your great-great-uncle. He's been gone 40 years now, but he told me this himself when I was about Krishy's age." She said Uncle Joseph had been working at a logging camp way up north, past high level, in the winter of 1951. The camp was small, maybe 15 men, and they were cutting timber in an area that the local Dene people had warned them about. The Dene elder who came to the camp, he told the foreman that the place was cursed, Grandma said. There was something wrong there, something old. The foreman, well, he just laughed, said they weren't superstitious. For the first 2 weeks, everything was normal. Then one of the men, a young guy named John from Quebec, went missing. He'd gone to check some traps and never came back. They searched for 3 days, but found nothing. No tracks or blood, no sign of a struggle. He was just gone. Uncle Joseph said the strangest thing was the quiet afterwards, Grandma continued. You know, the way the forest is never truly quiet. You'll always hear the animals and the insects. But after John disappeared, there were these moments of absolute silence. A week later, another man vanished. This time it was during the day, in broad daylight. He'd been working maybe 50 yards from the others, and when they called lunch, he didn't answer. They found his axe left in a tree, his gloves on the ground, but no footprints leading away. Nothing. The men were spooked now. A lot of them wanted to leave, but the foreman threatened to withhold their pay if they broke contract. So they stayed, but they started to work in groups, never letting anyone out of sight. Uncle Joseph, he started to have these dreams, Grandma said. Dreams about being hungry. So hungry it hurt. But not for food. For something else. Something warm. 2 nights after the dreams started, they heard a sound like wind through the trees, but forming words in a language that none of them recognized. It circled the camp, getting closer, then farther, then closer again. The men huddled in the main cabin, armed with whatever weapons they could find. But nothing came for them. In the morning, they found tracks, however. Big ones, and they looked like they had claws. The tracks meandered through the camp and led to each window of the cabins. Something had been watching them. Soon, Uncle Joseph saw it, Grandma said. He woke up, feeling as if something was telling him to peer outside the door, and he listened. There, at the edge of the lamplight, he saw John. But it wasn't John. Not anymore. Grandma continued. He was naked in the snow, skin gray-white like old ice. His mouth. Uncle Joseph said his mouth was open, so wide it looked like it had been torn, and his teeth within looked more like icicles, and he looked so very hungry. Come morning, the foreman finally agreed to abandon the camp. They packed up and left that very day, but as they were leaving, Uncle Joseph looked back and saw 3 figures at the edge of the woods. John, and the other missing man, and something else. Something thin and tall and wrong-looking even from a distance, and it watched them go. Grandma went quiet for a moment. Then she finally said, The Dene elder, when they told him what happened, well, he just nodded, said they were lucky. He told them that the Wachuge, the cannibal spirit, had been feeding there for generations. Said it could only take those who broke the taboo, those who had tasted human flesh or thought about it too hard when they were desperate. But once it took you, you became like it, always hungry and hunting. We didn't sleep well that night. Even back in Edmonton, I'd dream about John scratching at windows, asking me to let him in. I mostly forgot about the story as I got older. University, work, marriage. Life goes on like that. But early 2019, I remembered it again, because that's when I stumbled upon the Missing 411 series. And I couldn't help but think about the way some of those stories went. The way people seemed to just evaporate in thin air. The strange weather conditions. Clothes being found folded neatly. I know it sounds crazy, but I do wonder if maybe the Wachooge had something to do with it. If you believe in that kind of thing. Don't drive drunk, kids. From R.B. Josels. I've been sober for years now, not a drop since October 2021. People always ask what made me finally quit after 15 years of a little more than steady drinking, and I usually just say I had a wake-up call. That's true enough, but I don't usually go into detail about what kind of wake-up call it was. In 2021, on a Thursday, I remember because I'd just gotten paid and blew a decent chunk of money at a bar, I started to drink around 4 p.m., and I told myself I'd stop at 7. Then I said it would be 8. Then 9. You know how it goes. Well, I guess I hope you don't know how it goes. By the time I stumbled out to my truck around 11, the rational part of my brain, or what was left of it, knew that I shouldn't be driving. But then the drunk part of my brain was like, come on, it's only 20 minutes up the highway, and you drive better drunk. That's a lie. No one does. But then I thought about how it was rural Alberta, middle of the night, barely any traffic. I thought, what could happen? I remember I could barely hold on to my keys. The engine turned over. I recall thinking the yellow lines looked weird, like they were moving. And then I blacked out. I'm pretty sure I did, because my memory is blank there entirely. And what I remember next was that the world was all wrong. Everything was upside down. There was this rhythmic dripping sound, too. My head felt like someone had taken a sledgehammer to it. It took me about 10 seconds to realize I was hanging from my seatbelt, and there was blood running from somewhere on my scalp, dripping up or down, I guess, onto the roof of the cab. The windshield was spiderwebbed but intact. Through it, I could see dirt and grass where the sky should be. My truck had gone off the road near the river overpass and rolled down the embankment. I was honestly lucky to be alive. Somehow, the headlights were still on. I started to call for help, but the sounds that came from my mouth were more like croaks. My throat was extremely dry and pained, and talking made my head hurt worse. This went on for about 15 to 20 minutes, before I noticed movement through the window to my side. I thought, thank God, someone found me. Someone had seen my accident and came down to help. I tried to turn my head to look properly, but it sent a spike of pain through my neck. But I turned enough to see a face. This face was pressed against the glass, staring at me, pale as snow, completely hairless. The features were nearly human, nose and mouth in the right general shape, but it gave off that uncanny valley vibe. The mouth was just a line with no lips, and Christ, it had solid black eyes, not even a hint of white, just black from edge to edge. But the antlers were what made me really start to panic. They grew up from its temples, not huge like a mature buck's antlers, but maybe 8 inches each side, with 3 or 4 points, like they had been pushed through from inside its skull. Oh, I really screamed then. Not a call for help, just pure terror. The thing didn't react. It just kept staring from those eyes like oil pits. Then, almost gracefully, it moved out of view. I thrashed against the seatbelt, trying to break free, but I was stuck solid. The belt had locked up in the crash and I was hanging upside down and injured. I couldn't get the right angle to release it. I then began to hear movement behind the truck. Through the back window, I could see shapes. Legs, maybe. But bent weird. Like maybe they had too many joints or too few. The truck shifted slightly, and I heard the metal groan. Something had climbed onto the undercarriage. "Get away!" I screamed. "Get the heck away from me!" The metal shifted again. I started to hear scraping sounds like nails on metal. It was working its way along the driver's side. I screamed until my throat went raw, expecting any second to see that face again, reappearing in the window. Minutes passed, 5 or maybe 10. The scraping stopped. The weight on the truck seemed to disappear. I held my breath and listened, but I didn't hear anything but the blood dripping from me and the tick of cooling metal. Suddenly, there was movement to my left. Not at the window, though, but below it, or above it, given my position. A hand reached down through the gap where the door had buckled in the crash. Thin, with extremely protruding knuckles, nails yellow like bone. It was feeling along the roof's interior, searching around. Then it started to rise, still feeling around. It took me way too long to realize it was looking for the seatbelt release. One finger began to trace the button, almost gently. Then the whole hand wrapped around the mechanism. I remember my thoughts then. If it presses that button, it's gonna drag me out of here and I'll be dead. The hand tightened its grip, and then I was nowhere again. There was just blackness. I blacked out again. The worst possible moment in my life. Or would it be the second worst possible moment? What I remember after that is voices. Real human voices. Flashlight beams cutting through the cab. Someone was saying, "Sir, can you hear me?" over and over. When I looked over, I saw firefighters. Apparently a passing truck had seen my headlights in the ditch and called it in. They used the jaws of life to pry open my door. The same door that hand had reached through. They said I was lucky to be alive. The truck had rolled 3 times, landed upside down. I could have been crushed, I could have broken my neck. Especially, they said, with how I wasn't wearing a seatbelt. Yep, when they found me, my seatbelt was no longer connected, and gravity had done its job. The thing is, I remember wearing that seatbelt, even before the nightmare vision of that creature around the truck. I remember putting on the seatbelt when I was driving away from that bar. Well, the cops gave me a DUI, obviously. I lost my license, paid a massive fine, and I did some community service. But I never took another drink. Not after all that. Not after nearly dying, probably twice, and either having the worst hallucination of my entire life, or actually witnessing something that shouldn't exist. Something that almost successfully pulled me from my truck before people could find me.
Hit pause on whatever you're listening to and hit play on your next adventure. This fall, get double points on every qualified stay. Life's a trip. Make the most of it at Best Western. Visit bestwestern.com for complete terms and conditions.
Working across teams is tough, but Asana helps you handle it. Asana AI can spot roadblocks and assign work to keep everything on track. That's how work gets handled. Visit us at asana.com.
Clarence's estate. From Neems. Uncle Clarence was the family mystery. Left for Alaska in 1974, sent a Christmas card maybe every 5 years, never visited. When the lawyer called about his estate, I had to ask Mom to remind me which uncle he was. The hermit, she said. The one who got strange after Vietnam. He'd left me everything. Not out of love. I'd met him exactly once, at Grandma's funeral when I was 7. But I was the only one in the family without kids, without a real career, without ties. Maybe he figured I was the only one who might actually go up there to deal with his property. He was right. The house sat 40 miles outside Fairbanks, at the end of a dirt road that turned into a suggestion of a road after the first 10 miles. November wasn't the ideal time to handle an estate, but the lawyer said waiting until spring meant paying thousands in taxes and maintenance. So I flew up, rented a truck, and drove out to see what Uncle Clarence had left behind. The place was bigger than I'd expected. A real log house, not some thrown-together cabin. Solar panels on the roof, big propane tank, greenhouse attached to the south side. He'd been serious about living out there. Inside was neat, organized, like he'd known he was dying and had tidied up first. The lawyer had mentioned papers, said Clarence had been particular about me reading them before deciding what to do with the place. I found them in a filing cabinet in his study. 43 years of journals, weather logs, and what he called occurrence records. The weather logs were what you'd expect. Temperature, precipitation, wind. Detailed but boring. The journals were sparse, mostly notes about repairs, supply runs, books he'd read. But the occurrence records, those were different. December 1974, his first winter there. Short entry about finding tracks near the house after a storm. Said they looked human, but the stride was rather long, and they came from the north, where there was nothing but wilderness for 100 miles. February 1975. He heard someone calling his name during a blizzard, but he knew it couldn't be real. The nearest neighbor was 15 miles away, and nobody knew he was out there yet. But it sounded exactly like his sister, my mom. November 1975. Saw it for the first time, just a glimpse during a whiteout. Tall figure walking past the windows. Walking, not struggling against the wind like any normal person would be. Left no tracks where it should have. The entries went on like that. Some winters, nothing. Others, multiple incidents. 1981 seemed particularly bad. Things scratching at the walls. Something trying the doors. A face at the window that wasn't quite right. He'd drawn a sketch in the margin, but it was hard to make out. I spent the first week just reading and organizing. The house was comfortable enough. Generator worked. Wood stove heated the place fine. No cell service, but Clarence had a satellite internet setup that still functioned. I emailed Mom that I was okay, that I was cataloging everything. The first odd thing I noticed was the camera situation. Clarence had security cameras all around the property. Good ones, infrared, motion activated. But when I checked the system, huge chunks of footage were missing. Always winter footage. Always during the dates mentioned in his occurrence records. The computer showed the files had been manually deleted by Clarence. His final journal entry was from last March, 2 months before he died. He wrote that the winter had been quiet, no occurrences. He was grateful but also worried. He said the quiet winters usually meant the next one would be worse. And he said whoever inherited the place should know that some winters you had to be careful. Some winters it came. I found his camera equipment in a closet. Professional stuff. Telephoto lenses, night vision attachments, but no photos of anything unusual. Plenty of wildlife shots, landscapes, but nothing of what he'd been recording for decades. There was a box of exposed film that had been soaked in something and ruined. Deliberate, by the look of it. The second week, I started noticing things myself. Small stuff. Sounds that weren't quite wind. Shadows moving past windows that weren't quite trees. The motion lights triggering when nothing was there. I told myself it was just being alone in a strange place, reading too many of Clarence's records. But then I found the basement, not mentioned in any of the house documentation, hidden behind a shelf in the pantry. Clarence had converted it into something like a panic room. Reinforced door, independent air supply, enough food and water for weeks. One wall was different. Clarence had drawn a map of the property and surrounding area. Red X marks at various spots, all dated. I cross-referenced with his occurrence records. The X marks were sightings. They formed a rough circle around the house, getting closer over the years. The most recent ones were right at the property line. That night I heard my phone ringing, which was impossible. No cell service out there. But it rang and rang. When I finally found it, the screen showed Mom calling. I answered. Silence, then breathing, then Mom's voice, but wrong. Like someone had recorded her and was playing it back at the wrong speed. It said my name, said I should come outside, said she was cold. I didn't go outside. I went to the basement instead, locked myself in. Spent the night reading more of Clarence's records, understanding why he'd built this room, why he'd deleted the footage, why he'd destroyed the photos. He'd figured something out over the years. The Thing, because that's all he ever called it. The Thing. It learned. Adapted. If you photographed it, it knew. If you filmed it, it would find ways to corrupt the files. Or worse, appear at your door the next night. If you told people, tried to prove it existed, it got aggressive. But if you just documented quietly, just for yourself, and stayed inside during the bad nights, you could survive. At least, that's what he ended up believing. Some winters, it didn't come at all. Some winters, it came every night for weeks. No pattern he could ever work out. Just chance. Just weather. Just whatever drove it down from wherever it lived up north. I found Clarence's final recording, an audio file on his computer from February. His voice, tired but calm. He said he was sick. Cancer. Probably wouldn't make it to summer. Said he was leaving the place to whoever would come, because someone should know. Someone should watch. Not to fight it or film it or prove it exists. Just to know. To document. To warn the next person. He said the Thing had been coming around for as long as the native families could remember. They had different names for it, different stories, but all agreed on one thing. It had been here first, would be here last. The best you could do was respect it, stay out of its way, and hope it moved on. I stayed another week. 3 more occurrences. Scratching on the north wall that lasted for hours. Something walking on the roof, despite the steep pitch. And on my last night, a knock at the door. Polite, almost formal. 3 knocks, pause, 3 more. I didn't answer. Stayed in the basement until dawn, then packed everything valuable and drove out. Listed the property with a Fairbanks realtor the next day. Priced to sell fast. The buyer was a couple from California looking for a remote retreat. Off-grid living, they said. Perfect isolation. I gave them all of Clarence's journals except the occurrence records. Told them the basement was for storms. Didn't mention that some storms walked on 2 legs. They seemed thrilled with the place. Said they'd move in after the holidays, spend their first winter getting acclimated. I wished them luck. Meant it. Maybe their winters would be quiet. Maybe the Thing had moved on, maybe. That night in the hotel, I read through Clarence's final journal one more time. The one where he'd written, in shaky handwriting, his last observation. That it was getting bolder, coming closer. That 40 years of coexistence hadn't made it friendlier, just more patient. That some winters, when the storms came from the north and the temperatures dropped below 40, you could hear it learning to speak, practicing with the voices of everyone who'd disappeared over the years, getting better at sounding human. The couple emailed me last week, said they love the place, said the quiet is amazing, said they've been hearing the strangest sounds at night, probably just the house settling. I didn't write back. I burned Clarence's journals before leaving Alaska. All of them. The occurrence records, the weather logs, everything. Stood out in the snow behind the realtor's office and watched 43 years of documentation turn to ash. Clarence's estate. From Neems. The nightmare that changed everything. From Summon. When I was 8 years old, my stepdad left. That was 23 years ago, and I still can't sleep with my bedroom door open. We lived outside Colville, Washington, in this old farmhouse my mom rented for cheap, because it was so far away from anything else. It was just us, the Kettle River, and miles of pine forest. Mom worked at the reservation clinic, and my stepdad, I called him Boba, not sure why, just did. He did construction when he could find it. Boba was all right. Better than all right, actually. My real dad split when I was 2, so Boba was all I knew. He'd been with Mom since I was 4, and he used to take me fishing at Sullivan Lake. He would buy me comics even when Mom said we couldn't afford it, and he taught me card tricks. He had this thick Boston accent and called everyone Buddy. He was a good guy. Quiet, but good. In winter one year, we had this unexpected warm snap. Then the temperature crashed again, leaving everything covered in a crust of ice. The power kept flickering on and off, and Mom had to keep the fireplace going with wood all night. That night I had this dream about drowning. Oddly enough, not in water, but in snow. It was filling up my mouth, my nose, my lungs, and I was trying to scream, but nothing came out. I woke up gasping, sheets soaked with sweat, even though it was so cold in the house. Our house was small. There was my room, Mom and Boba's room, one bathroom, kitchen, living room, and that was it. Their bedroom was maybe 15 feet from mine, straight down the hall. They usually kept their door closed. Not locked, just closed. Mom said it helped keep the heat in. But that night it was open, maybe 6 inches, enough to see a slice of darkness beyond. I sat there in bed for a while, trying to shake off that stupid dream. I got up, barefoot on cold floorboards, and I walked down the hallway. It was dark enough that I had to put my hand on the wall to guide myself. It was then that I started to hear breathing, like rapid breathing. When I got to the door and started to push it open, I called, "Mama?" The curtains were open in their room. Mom always left them that way. She liked waking up to the sunlight. Moonlight came through in this bright silver rectangle, landing on their bed. Mom was asleep on the far side, peacefully. She was turned away from me, just a bump under the quilts. But Bobo was sitting up, rigid as a fence post. His eyes were wide and reflecting the moonlight. And when I looked closer, I swear he was crying. There were tears down his face. His whole body was shaking. Not like a cold shake either, but like he was holding himself still with everything he had. "Boba?" I whispered. His lips moved. I think he said, "Buddy," but I can't be sure. Even if he did say buddy, what came out of his mouth sounded like a warning, and that really scared me. He didn't even look at me, didn't blink at all. He stared at the far corner of the room, the one where the moonlight wasn't touching. I didn't want to look. My 8-year-old mind said, "Don't look over there. Just go back to bed." But I looked anyway. That corner wasn't empty. There was a person there. Well, it was shaped like a person. It was tall and had to duck its head slightly where the ceiling sloped down. Its skin was pale like paper, like nothing I'd ever seen. It stood perfectly still with its arms at its sides, facing the bed, staring at Boba. I couldn't see its face clearly in the shadows, thankfully. But I could see its hands, Strange zombie-like hands is what I remember thinking as a kid. The worst part was how still it was. Not motionless like it was trying not to be seen, but still like it didn't need to move, like it could just wait there forever if it wanted to. Boba made a sound then, a small broken noise, like when you're trying not to cry in front of someone. I backed out of the room, slow, careful, like when you see a wasp and don't want to startle it. I made it to the hallway and closed their door as quietly as I could, leaving it exactly how I'd found it. I went back to my room. I got under the covers and pulled them over my head. I did my best to convince myself it was a nightmare. The thing about being 8 years old is you can make yourself believe almost anything if you try hard enough. I lay there under the blankets, breathing my own hot air, until somehow I fell asleep. When I woke up, it was past 10. Mom was in the kitchen, and she was crying. Not loudly, just sitting at the table with tears rolling down her face. "Where's Boba?" I asked. She looked at me before answering. "He had to go, baby." "Where did he go?" I asked. "Just away. He needed to go away." I only found out later, years later, that he had left in the middle of the night, packed one bag, took his truck, and drove off. He left a note that said, "I'm sorry. I can't stay. Please take care of Buddy." Mom tried calling him. His brother back in Boston and his friends and his old job sites knew nothing. It was like he vanished. Not like a missing person case, but just went to live a completely different life. His brother finally told Mom that Boba had called once to say that he was okay, but could not come back, and he wouldn't say why. Mom never understood. She thought maybe he had been seeing someone else, or maybe the pressure of being a stepdad was just getting to him. One of any of the usual reasons men leave. She remarried when I was 12, a nice insurance salesman who was normal, and we moved to Spokane, and life went on. But to this day, I think I know what happened. I'd seen what was in that corner, and more importantly, I'd seen Boba's face. That wasn't the face of a man who wanted to leave. That was the face of a man who had seen something that broke a piece of him, something that made staying impossible. Well, that brings us to a sort of early end to this episode. My apologies for not being able to fill out a full hour this time, but I've been wanting to do Wet'suge stories for a while, ever since people were telling me that Wet'suges and Wendigos were getting mixed up and fused together. But to me, they sound sort of like the same thing, but through different cultural interpretations. That's just my opinion, and I think both creatures are incredibly cool and creepy. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Unexplained Encounters. I've been your host, Darkness Prevails, and if you haven't already, follow me on Twitter at DarkPrevails. Pre-order my book, Creepy Campfire Stories, which comes out July 8th. Send us your scary stories of the unexplained at darkstories.org, and follow and review Unexplained Encounters on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thank you. Until next time, everyone, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.
Shop your new mattress your way at Ashley. Browse our wide selection online.
I was on a spontaneous camping trip in the middle of fall. Sort of made the impulse decision to go for one last trip up to the northern woods of Minnesota before winter rolled in and put everything on hold for several months. I'd been up to these woods many times before, living just a couple hours south, so it was my regular place to go when I wanted to camp or spend a weekend hiking. The spot I was at was a small, secluded lake. The thing about Minnesota that I really loved is that it's known for having thousands of lakes scattered around the northern portion of the state, which means you can pretty often find smaller lakes that have nobody else around. Having one all to myself was always great, and so when I found this spot a few years ago, it sort of became my go-to camping area. The first 3 days of this trip were completely unnoteworthy. Nothing happened. I just camped and enjoyed having an empty lake to myself, spending the days wandering the woods, swimming in the water, and relaxing to the peace and quiet. I felt very safe and saw nothing to make me feel otherwise. It was on the 4th day, though, that I woke up at sunrise and exited my tent to find scattered footprints all over my campsite. Not just in the area around it, but some going right up to the front of my tent. They weren't there before, and it wasn't from me. The prints were from heavy boots, which I didn't even have, and they clearly came by while I was sleeping. I instantly felt really uncomfortable, knowing I had some sort of visitor in the middle of the night. I spent that whole morning walking the area, both through the forest and around the lake, looking for any other signs of anyone around. I didn't find anything. It wasn't really the fact that someone else arrived here that I was so concerned about. It was that they arrived in the middle of the night and walked all around the area I'd clearly been set up at, even coming right up to my tent, which was just insanely creepy. Then they just left without any traces, not even camping around here. It just didn't add up. I kept my eyes open for the rest of the day. Leaving did cross my mind, but the last thing I wanted to do was cut my final camping trip of the year short, and I saw no signs of whoever it was still being around. Looked like he really did just show up and then leave. Maybe he was hoping the spot would be empty and didn't want to share the lake with anyone else. Anyway, the day went by pretty slowly. I hung around the campsite, not doing too much. When the sun set, I stayed by the campfire and waited for myself to get tired. I'd mostly calmed down about the situation. I still thought it was weird and almost unexplainable, but continuing to think about it would only make me more unsettled, and I would never get any answers anyway. The night was pretty quiet. The water moving in the lake, the campfire, and the wind made it hard not to feel relaxed. I settled in my chair and slumped back, cozied up inside my winter jacket. My eyes were starting to get heavy, but I didn't want to get up, so I just let myself fall half asleep in the chair. I say half asleep because I don't think I ever actually fell asleep fully. My eyes were closed and everything, but I still think I was mostly conscious. And then I heard it. A voice call out my name. My eyes shot open, and I sat frozen for a moment. I whipped my head around in all directions. The forest was quiet, and everything seemed to be just as it was before. My eyes were still wide open, and my heart was racing. I couldn't tell if it was just a quick dream or something, or if I'd actually heard someone call my name out. It seemed so ridiculous and impossible that there was no way. But it felt so real. After a minute, I called out hello and listened to my voice echo through the woods with no response. I guess it really was just a quick dream, or maybe even one of those sleep paralysis type hallucinations because of the half asleep state I was in. That's how I tried to reassure myself. My heart immediately racing like that got me wide awake though. And that feeling of unsettledness still lingered. I couldn't get rid of it. I must have sat there for another half hour until I felt my eyes getting a bit heavy again. But this time, before I even closed them, or was even near falling asleep, I heard it again. A voice calling out my name from the darkness of the woods. The voice I didn't recognize. But the way he said my name was like he was asking for my help, or wanting me to come out there. I I stood up and stared out at the woods. His voice called out my name again. It sounded like he wasn't that far away. Obviously, my head was spinning. How did this random guy in the woods know my name? And what was he doing out there in the dark? I took a few steps toward the trees and out to the edge of the light, then reluctantly called out hello again. There was a quiet pause for 15 seconds before the response I got was just the guy calling out my name for a fourth time. Something felt really wrong here. The way he was trying to lure me into walking out there into the woods, where it was legitimately pitch black. No way I was following his voice, no matter how curious and tempted I was to get answers. I took a few steps back and started to pack my things. I wasn't packing all that fast though, because I was constantly stopping to listen and check my surroundings. Not to mention the campfire was just glowing ashes at this point, so taking everything down in the dark wasn't all that easy. It felt like I was running out of time though. The voice kept getting closer as the light from the campfire faded, and several times footsteps would crunch on the leaves not too far away. Whoever was out there had to know what they were doing, which was horrifying. When I finally had everything packed, I threw on my backpack and took out the flashlight. I debated whether or not to turn it on, but decided it might be best to leave it off and try to disappear in the woods, letting the darkness give me enough cover to get away from him and ensure he couldn't follow me. So I left it off and quickly hurried in the opposite direction of the voice. The man called out again as I was leaving, and I only turned back once I was further away. I could barely see the warm glow of the embers from the campfire, and standing just behind it was the faintest outline of a figure. Couldn't make out anything distinct, although something about him looked extremely uncanny, or just off in some way. I turned around and hurried deeper into the woods, hearing the man's voice call out my name one more time, before it was suddenly just me in the empty, quiet, and dark woods again. The hike out of there was nerve-wracking to say the least, but the relief of making it out and getting back to my car and away from those woods, I can't even describe. I thought about calling the cops, but honestly thought I'd sound crazy. Some guy calling out my name in the woods and I guess stalking me. Like, what would cops even do about that? So now, almost 3 years later, I still don't know what truly happened out there that night. I know it's insane, but a part of me is upset that I didn't walk closer toward the voice to try and find out who it was, or how they knew my name. I know if I had though, it could have been the last decision I'd ever make. I prefer to remain anonymous, but this happened several years ago. I worked at a small standalone business, and one of my coworkers was a guy named Cameron. We connected right away, both having been hired around the same time, and our desks were right next to each other. So needless to say, we talked a lot and had a great work friendship. We never hung out outside of work, but we always joked about going on a camping trip together, since we were both into hiking and stuff, and often found ourselves talking about it during the workday. I never thought it was really gonna happen though, until one day I went into work and his desk was cleared out, and Cameron wasn't there. Turned out he'd been fired, for reasons I of course wasn't permitted to know. I got a text from him that same day, asking about meeting up outside of work and going on that camping trip we always talked about. Honestly, I felt bad for him, and knowing now that I'd likely never see him again if I didn't, I took him up on the offer. I mean, how bad could it be? We made the plans, and a week later, we met up at a forest trailhead 2 hours west of the city. He looked very excited and happy to see me, and I was actually happy to see him as well. Right off the bat, though, I did feel like he wasn't the same person as he was in the office. Not in a concerning way, but it was just something I noticed. We started heading down the trail and talked the whole way there. I tried subtly asking about why he didn't work at the office anymore, but he avoided the question. At work, he was always very open about everything, probably too open, so it was kind of strange to see him more reserved like this. But I assumed he just made an embarrassing mistake or something. Anyway, we got to the campsite and set up both tents, then made lunch. And as soon as we were done eating, Cameron abruptly stood up and said, "Be right back," then walked off into the woods. The way he said it was like he had somewhere to be, which in this setting didn't make any sense. Like, why not just say you were heading out for a walk or whatever? I stayed at the campsite, relaxing for 10 minutes until he came back. He didn't say anything and acted like nothing happened, so I just let it go over my head. We talked for a bit longer. I don't know, an hour I guess. Then he did the same thing. He said he'd be back and walked out into the woods, except this time it was right in the middle of a conversation. He suddenly just looked out at the trees, stopped talking, and left. First thing I did was look where he had looked, but didn't see anything. This time I actually felt really weird about it, unsettled almost. Again, 10 minutes later, he came back. This time I asked where he went, and he thought for a second, but just said nowhere. No explanation whatsoever. And again, I just let it go. I'd been talking to Cameron nearly every day for 6 months straight, so a few strange things weren't going to fully change my view of him. We talked some more around the campfire, and eventually went into our tents to go to bed. I was pretty tired, so I fell asleep no problem. However, I woke up in the middle of the night. My eyes opened, and I distinctly remember how quiet it was. Just the soft forest sounds. I unzipped my tent and looked out, just to check the surroundings, still not knowing why I woke up. Right away, I saw Cameron's tent was open, and he wasn't in it. I looked all around the campsite and didn't see him anywhere. I noticed the flashlight was missing though, but I didn't see a light anywhere in the trees. "Cameron?" I called out his name a few times, but he didn't call back. I sat outside my tent for a whole minute, looking all around and waiting to see if he came back, until I started to hear something out in the trees. It sounded like chatter, two people talking quietly back and forth. "Cameron, you out there?" The talking stopped, and the forest was quiet again. After 30 seconds of tension, Cameron slowly walked out of the trees and into the campsite. His face was tense, but he tried to hide it with a nervous smile. I asked him who was out there. He paused, then said no one. As he was talking, though, a few footsteps came from out in the trees. I know he heard it too. I looked at him again, and again asked who was out there. I was starting to get really uneasy. But even still, he said no one. There was a very tense 15 or 20 seconds where both of us just looked at each other. And quietly, slow footsteps were approaching from the dark. Adrenaline built up in me until I suddenly just bolted down the trail, leaving everything behind. As I ran, I could hear Cameron and some other guy talking, but I never looked back. I didn't stop until I was at my car. Thank God we drove separately, and I kept my keys and phone on me. I drove home and spent the rest of that night just thinking about what the hell went wrong. I ended up texting Cameron, but the message didn't even deliver. he'd already blocked me. Since that night, I'd never had any contact with him. I don't know who else was out there, or what him and Cameron were planning, but I think I'm really lucky to have gotten away. Last year, just around early November, I took a trip out to my hometown, mostly to see some old friends, but also to enjoy the week in a nice vacation cabin. Just a nice rental place in the woods. My hometown wasn't big and mostly surrounded by forest, with plenty of great views and camping areas nearby. I had actually never been camping before, but I'd been doing tons of research and really wanted to get into it. I'd collected all the gear I needed and figured a great first time camping would be in a forest I was familiar with, right outside of my hometown. That way I felt safer and could ease into the hobby. I chose the rental cabin specifically because there was a trail behind it that led to a small campground. I thought if anything went wrong, I could just head back to the cabin and everything would be alright. Felt like a risk-free way to enjoy my first trip. I spent the first couple days hanging out with my friends, and an additional day just chilling at the cabin and prepping my gear. Then I finally headed out to the campground. The trail was only an hour long. For the first 10 minutes, I was more focused on getting my backpack adjusted the right way and making sure everything was just going as planned. Once I got it all situated and had nothing else to worry about, I started to get a strange feeling. The feeling of being watched from out in the trees. It was my first time being alone in a forest, so I thought I was just nervous. But the feeling really didn't go away like I thought it would. Every time I'd look out at the woods past the trail, this hollow, awful feeling would come over me. It really did feel like a sign to get the hell out of there. But I didn't listen. I kept going, fighting those feelings all the way up to the campsite. The campsite wasn't much, just a small bit of land that I honestly wouldn't have thought was even a campsite, if not for a few scraps left around by previous campers. This place definitely wasn't very established, because it was unkempt and not maintained at all. Still, being off the trail and in a more open area made me feel a bit better. I felt okay about it enough to stay. I started unpacking and getting my tent set up. This was my first time, so I was following the step-by-step instructions and making sure I got it right. Took maybe 15 minutes, which I don't think was too bad. It was as I was putting the final rain cover over it that a man arrived at the campsite. He was tall and looked around my age, so mid-20s. When I looked over at him, he waved and gave a strange smile. Strange because he made a regular smile, except the rest of his face didn't move. Like he just smiled with his mouth and teeth, while having a blank face. I thought it was really weird, and some crazy coincidence that he showed up right after I did, to a campsite that didn't seem to be used very often. But what did I know? I continued to mind my own business and get everything all sorted in my area, taking everything out and gathering sticks to build a fire with. There was already a small fire ring that someone must have built forever ago. As I was doing all that, the man set up his own tent, not too far from me. But oddly, that was it. That was all he brought. I saw him walk up with a backpack, which I thought was an actual backpack, but it was just a sling bag that had the tent in it. He didn't even have a sleeping bag, or food, or anything at all. I know that for a fact, because his tent was mostly a mesh see-through, not even having a rain cover over it. And the man was just sitting there, doing nothing. I felt weird every time I happened to glance over, because he would immediately look at me, and I'd have to quickly look away. After gathering all the sticks and finally having a while to just sit there and do nothing, I couldn't help but get more and more creeped out by this guy. Just a gut feeling that something was really off about him. And with the sun starting to go down, the thought of being there alone with him at night was really starting to bother me. As much as I hated myself for it, I decided it wasn't worth staying here while I felt this way, especially with my rental cabin not too far. Might even be able to make it before the sun was fully down. I started packing, and the man immediately got out of his tent. He stood next to it, and while he tried to not make it obvious, it was very obvious that he was watching me. His smile was gone now, and his whole face was straight and almost annoyed. I didn't even bother organizing my backpack, throwing everything in and just hoping it would zip up. When I was finally ready to leave, sunlight was just poking out from the top of the trees, so I knew I had to hurry. But the man hadn't taken down his tent, so I hoped that meant he was staying. I started walking. I kept checking behind me, making sure he didn't follow. For the first few minutes, I was relieved to see an empty trail every time I looked back. But about 10 minutes in, I turned around again and saw him. The trail wasn't perfectly straight, but far back, I saw him through the trees, coming down the trail toward me. I felt myself go numb. I was horrified. I picked up the pace, moving faster down the trail. From what I could see, I don't think he knew that I saw him, and the sun going down actually made things better for me. I was able to get back to the rental cabin, throwing my bag down inside and locking every door. I then posted up at the back window for 15 minutes, staring at the woods as the sun fully set and it became dark and lifeless. And it was as I was still staring out the window that a sudden knock shook the front door behind me. Not just some casual knock though. Over and over, he was banging his fist against the door. In a panic, I called the police. I genuinely couldn't tell if he was just knocking really hard or actually trying to break the door down, and I was too scared to even look. As soon as I started talking on the phone, the man stopped for a second. I knew he was listening. Then his footsteps ran around the cabin, and I'm pretty sure I heard a few thumps from him trying to open up one of the windows before his footsteps fled into the woods. After that, it stayed quiet until 2 officers arrived 20 minutes later. With everything I told them, the officers agreed the man seemed to have some really bad intentions. However, finding him wasn't so easy. I knew what he looked like, but that was about it. They did a quick search that night with flashlights, but they never found him. His tent was gone from the campsite as well. I truly don't know what could have happened that night. I still can't forgive myself for not listening to my gut right away. It would have prevented everything that happened that night. I should have listened to my gut the moment I started feeling off about that forest.
This might be,
Why do I love having a healthcare concierge?
It's the speaking to a real live person.
It's the making.
I worked at a gas station full-time for some years in my 30s. During my last few months working there, I noticed this guy would come in every few days. In my opinion, he was very obviously a druggie, always coming in and looking like he'd been up for 3 days straight. He'd look around, all paranoid, and would grab a few things to eat, then would rush out and drive away. He always paid in cash and would have exact change ready to go to make the interaction quicker. He never spoke a word. He got in and got out as fast as possible. I never really thought too much of it because he seemed harmless enough. The only person he looked like he was hurting was himself with his drug addiction. But then one night, he was acting differently. He came in at 2 a.m., but he was pacing around the store, just walking around frantically. After a couple minutes, it became more strange because he'd never stayed inside the store for this long. I glanced outside at the gas station lot and didn't see any cars. Where our gas station was located made it nearly impossible to walk to, or at least very impractical. I looked back at the guy, and he was still pacing around. "Hey, are you alright? You want me to call someone to pick you up?" I asked, just trying to help. He stopped and shot a look at me. His eyes were dark and sleepless. Then he rushed out of the store, and I watched him walk past the pumps and over to the road until he was out of sight. The guy was weird and all, but even this was a little extra from him. That night went by without anything else, but the following night, the same thing happened. He came in, paced around, then rushed away as soon as I asked if he needed anything. I was honestly concerned for him until the next night when he came in and was acting normal again. He got some food and paid in cash, then left just like he always used to do. After that visit, a week went by without him coming in. I was working the register on a quiet Wednesday night, and I'd mostly forgotten about his strange behavior from last week. When he came back, he drove up in his truck and parked, then walked through the door slowly and stopped in the middle of the store. He looked to have this blank expression on his face, like he was in a state of shock. It's also worth mentioning that he looked extra tired. He stood for a moment, then walked to the food aisle. I tried not to spy on him too much, but he stayed in the store for almost 10 minutes before coming up to the counter. He still had that blank look in his eyes as he slowly put a small bag of chips down and handed me cash. It was very different from usual because he was in no rush. He actually seemed to be purposefully moving slowly. Once I rang up his food, he grabbed it, and in an unexpected moment, he quietly said, "Thank you." I'd seen this guy for months, and this was the first time he'd ever spoken a single word. I watched him walk out to his truck, but he stopped right by the door. A brief moment passed before I looked over and saw 4 men running up to him. They grabbed him aggressively, dragging him across the gas station and tossed him in their van. And just like that, they took off, leaving nothing but his truck sitting in the parking lot. When the police got there, they ran the plates, but the truck belonged to someone else. Turned out it belonged to his dad, who identified the guy when he was shown the security tapes. Other than that, nothing else was found. None of the people from the van were ever identified, and no traces of him were left. He never turned up, and if I had to take a guess from what I saw, he probably never will. I'm a 26-year-old male, and this happened 2 years ago. I was doing my university classes online and took up a part-time job at a gas station. I worked 3 nights a week, from 10 p.m. to 4 in the morning. This wasn't the schedule I preferred, but they paid better than any other part-time work. The first couple days, they had someone else working with me for training. Then it was just me. They would leave me with a list of tasks to complete during my shift, and usually they would only total up to less than an hour of work. The rest of the time, I'd be on my phone or helping customers. At the start of my shift this night, I began working on completing this list. I got a cart from the back room and walked it through the aisles to fill anything that was low. While I did this, I heard the front door open. I looked over the aisle to see if they were going to the counter, but I didn't see anyone. I saw the front door slowly close, so I knew it had been opened. I figured whoever it was had just forgotten something in their car or changed their mind about something. I continued working, and when I was done, I rolled the cart into the back room and locked it up. As I turned off the lights and headed back, I heard the front door open again. I rounded the corner, but again, nobody was inside. I went and opened it, peeking my head outside and looking around. No cars were at the pumps, and I didn't see anyone at all. I closed the door and went back to the register to take a short break and scroll on my phone. Really, I thought nothing of it, until I heard something at the back door. A small thump, like someone was trying to open it. I waited for anything else, but that was it, just a single thump. I decided to pull up the security footage to check, just in case it was something I should be concerned about. On the camera, there was a man standing right outside the back door. He had his hand on the door handle, but he wasn't moving at all. I kept this camera up so I could keep an eye on him, but opened the footage for the camera by the front door. I rewinded it to when I heard the doors open. It showed the same man walking up to the gas station, pushing open the door, then running to the back of the building. He did the same thing a few minutes later, but then he stayed at the back door and hasn't left since. After seeing this, I dialed 911 to report the suspicious man outside the gas station. While on the phone, another thump came from the back. I looked over at the cameras, and the man was running around the building to the front. I tossed the phone on the counter and hurried to get the pistol from under the counter when the man barged through the front door. The way he slammed into the doors, I'm surprised the glass didn't shatter. He ran up to me like he was looking for a fight, but then he suddenly stopped and ran to the back. I heard a few loud thumps from him kicking a door, and then it was quiet. I picked up the phone and continued informing the police. 5 minutes later, they arrived. The 3 officers cautiously walked into the back room, through the door that the man had kicked down. In the corner of the room, they found him. As the officers described it, the man was standing in the corner, whispering to himself, and was completely unaware of what was going on. He was holding a kitchen knife and refused to listen to anything the officers were saying. When they eventually approached the man to detain him, he jumped at them in an attempt to stab them, but he was brought down without anyone getting harmed. I was surprised to hear that he wasn't drunk or on drugs. Some people are just crazy, which makes me think that I got really lucky to have not been seriously harmed that night. As far as I know, the man never said what he was doing or why he was there. My dad owns a gas station at the edge of our town. I've helped him run it for over 6 years, doing all sorts of things. When it comes down to it though, the job he always needed the most help with was just working the register. We had a lot of turnover of employees, so sometimes we'd have enough to cover all the day and night shifts, but sometimes we would only have a few employees, so me and my dad would have to cover shifts. During these few months, we were low on staff, so I was working the overnight shifts. These were my least favorite shifts because it would mess up my whole schedule outside of work, and I'd always be tired. I'd sit at the register sipping on my coffee and trying to keep my eyes from shutting. On this night,
it was extra hard to stay awake because of the heavy rain outside. Something about the rain ticking on the roof made me so sleepy. Also, the rain kept most customers away, so I wouldn't even have anyone around to give me reason to stay awake. At 1 a.m., 3 hours into my shift, a car pulled into the gas station and parked by one of the pumps. It was some beat-up gray SUV. They stayed next to the pump for a good 5 to 6 minutes before they finally turned off the car. A man got out and walked around to his trunk. He was wearing a dark hoodie and black jeans. He opened the back and started grabbing out some gas cans. I think he brought out 3, filling each of them up and setting them down next to his car. But then he grabbed more, one after the other, filling up probably 10 to 15 gas cans. Once he finally hooked the pump back up for good, he stood next to the cans he had spread all over the ground and stared at them. I thought he was counting them at first, but once a whole 2 minutes passed and he was still staring, I didn't know what he was doing. He turned around and looked at the shop where I was standing. I looked away, but a few seconds later, he walked in. He went right to the back and stood out of my view behind one of the aisles. I heard him shuffling through something on the shelf. Then he came up to the counter. He tossed a box of matches on the counter, and my stomach immediately dropped. I looked at the box, and all I could think of was the insane amount of gas cans that he'd just filled up.
Come on, I gotta get going,
the man said, almost in a yell. I picked up the matches to scan, but I knew I couldn't take the chance on something like this.
I'm not sure if I'm comfortable selling these to you,
I said, hoping he would just understand why and leave. He looked me in the eyes and joked.
What? You think I'm gonna burn a house down or something?
He held eye contact and smiled. After a second, he stepped back, threw his hands up, then gave me the middle finger and walked out. This man was changing emotions so fast, it was disturbing. As he loaded up the gas cans back into the SUV, I called the police and let them know that I had some concerns about this man. I made it clear that I had no evidence that he planned on any wrongdoing, but it just all seemed a bit off. A minute later, the man got in his car and drove away, and I was left to just wonder what that man was up to. I sat at the counter, helping a couple more customers over the next 2 hours, before a cop car pulled in. They pulled me aside, saying they had some questions about a man I'd reported earlier. The officer started asking me about every single detail, like what he looked like and what car he was driving. After the questioning, they told me that about an hour after I called, they received a call from a worried mother about a threat her husband had made. A threat to burn their house down with them in it. Apparently they were having some sort of argument, and she waited to call because she was worried about the consequences if her husband found out. At the time she called, though, he still hadn't been seen since he was last at my gas station. The officer left afterward, and I was in awe, thinking about the quote-unquote joke he made about burning a house down. A whole week went by with no updates, so I ended up calling the station and asking about it. After confirming my relation to the case, they informed me that they'd caught the man in the act 2 nights after I'd called. I guess he was missing for 2 whole days and randomly showed back up, pouring gasoline on the property in the middle of the night. They had an officer stationed on watch outside the house, so thankfully it didn't go very far. I still can't believe that happened, though. It was by far the most disturbing thing I'd been involved with, and if I'd let him walk away with those matches, I think it could have been infinitely worse. This happened almost 4 years ago now, on a road trip I was taking across the country. I'm a frequent traveler and adventurer, going on long road trips and stopping at great hiking and camping locations all around the nation. At the time, I'd been on the road for well over a month and was taking a short break at a small town in Nevada. While at the bar talking with the locals, they asked me if I was here to see the mines. I didn't know exactly what they meant and asked for more details, and they all talked about how there were hundreds of abandoned mines and mining towns all over the state. When I went back to my camper that night, I looked it up and found all these interesting mines not far from where I was. I had planned to just pass through Nevada as a whole, but after seeing this, I couldn't help myself. The next day, I set out for one of the abandoned mining towns. The actual hiking portion only took an hour and a half, but it was mostly uphill. When I arrived, the town was on a flat portion of the large hill. There were 20 to 30 small wooden buildings, and in the center of the town was a railroad leading into the hill where the mine entrance was. I walked along this railroad, looking at the identical rows of wooden structures. I was more interested in the actual mine than I was in the ghost town, but it was still cool to see. I checked out one of the structures, but it was full of dirt and rubble, and I was sure that all the others would probably be the same. At the entrance to the mine, I took out my flashlight, and when I pointed it through, the tunnel was so long that I couldn't even see the end. I started walking, and the further inside I got, the more quiet everything was, until eventually, it was just the sound of my footsteps echoing through the mine. After a couple minutes, I reached the end of the railroad tracks and was met by a sign that said the area beyond was closed. Of course, I walked past it. The tunnel very quickly became shallower and less well-rounded. There was then a turn that started going down at a slope, and at one section of it, the floor had caved in. Someone before me had set up some makeshift walkway to get across the opening, but it seemed incredibly dangerous and unstable. I pointed the flashlight down, and the drop was enough to have me permanently trapped if I were to fall. I decided to turn back and went down one of the other side passages that I'd passed up previously and found myself at a ladder going down a steep tunnel. Again, I shined my flashlight and saw that the bottom of the ladder wasn't even visible. I started my descent, but not long into it, I heard something from below. It was a loud thud echoing through the mine. The echo made it hard to know how close or far it was. I pointed my flashlight down, and while I didn't see the cause of the sound, I did see the bottom. I climbed down and found myself at the base of another passageway, and a few feet in, I found what caused the thud. There was a large rock sitting in the middle of the tunnel, which I thought could have fallen from the ceiling, but it wasn't hard to tell that it was an entirely different kind of rock, which begged the question, how did it fall and create a thud? I got my answer when I pointed the flashlight further down the tunnel. Two almost unidentifiable people stood in the middle of the passage about 10 feet down. One man and one woman. I knew from one look that they were not explorers. The way they looked at me was like they didn't even know I was a person. I started backing up, being cautious with my movements to not make them feel threatened in any way. When I got to the ladder, I dreaded putting the flashlight in my pocket and started climbing up. Part of the way up, I swear, I heard someone grab onto the rungs below me and begin climbing up quickly. I looked down and saw nothing but darkness. I screamed and began climbing up as fast as I could. I sprinted out of the mine and away from the ghost town. During the hike back, I collected my thoughts, thinking maybe what I heard was their footsteps, and in the moment I'd just mistaken it for them climbing up after me, but it was still terrifying. I drove down to a police station in the area and reported what had happened, but as far as I know, the police didn't do any sort of search or anything, despite me telling them that they looked malnourished and deeply insane. Even if they didn't know it themselves, they seriously needed help. I did some digging online since then and thought of some interesting theories as to why they may have been there to begin with. There were several cases from around the area of couples that went missing within the past 10 years, mostly due to committing horrible crimes and likely running away from the police. It just makes me think how if that were to be true, and these were two people who'd committed terrible crimes, then I was very lucky to have escaped after seeing them. Me and my best friend Glenn grew up in a small town far from any big cities. The population was less than 1,000, so yeah, it was very local and everyone knew everyone. Growing up, rumors would spread about various creepy things that would go on in the town, all most likely fake, but one of the words that would spread was of this small community a few miles out in the surrounding woods that was abandoned decades ago. By the time Glenn and I were in high school, we found out from multiple people that the community was actually real and there was a whole history to it. After finding that out, it was impossible for us to resist the urge to go out there and see what all the talk was about. We tried planning the whole trip out, but in the end, we just packed a backpack with some water and flashlights, then headed into the woods. We got some basic directions to this poorly made trail that supposedly led there, and we followed it down for about 3 miles, but then it ended. There were no other trails or anything, it was just a dead end. My immediate thought was that we'd been set up by some elaborate prank, but Glenn wasn't convinced. He somehow got me to follow him for another half-mile through the woods, not following any trail or directions. By then, we'd already been out longer than expected, and the sun wasn't at its highest. I was nervous about getting lost without the sunlight or a clear path to follow, but just before we turned back, Glenn spotted a shape in the distance. It was too far to see exactly what, but it was rigid and definitely man-made. As we got closer, the shape revealed itself to be a worn and broken down cabin. The roof had caved in, and it looked like people had been around here recently, but when we walked around to the other side of the cabin, there was a large field where all the trees had been cut down. In the field stood 6 cabins of varying sizes, along with a few other structures that I couldn't really identify. Both of us were shocked to actually have found this place, and in person, it was way creepier than we ever could have imagined. The houses were all falling apart in one way or another. We walked over to one of the cabins close to us and went inside. It was trashed, but it looked like most of the furniture, like wooden chairs and tables, were still intact and sitting in the same place they had been decades ago. The sunset was casting long shadows on everything, which really just gave it all an eerie feeling. I went into what I think was supposed to be the bedroom, but as I looked around, I heard someone walking outside the cabin. I turned around to give Glenn a nervous look, but he wasn't there. Staying quiet, I looked through a crack in the wall to see if the person outside was Glenn, but as the footsteps came closer, I caught sight of them. It was a tall, old man, I'd say mid-50s, half naked, and the clothes he did have on were torn and disgusting. He walked past the cabin, and I turned back and started looking through the rooms for Glenn, but he must have left at some point. I exited through an empty window frame and stayed behind the cabin as I tried to scan the whole field for any sign of Glenn, but I saw no signs of him. I assumed he was exploring one of the other houses, but I had no idea if he was even aware of this man that had just entered the abandoned community. In my frantic state of moving around the outside of the cabin and searching for Glenn, I realized I'd lost sight of the man. I was struggling to keep myself calm, and the whole woods was getting darker by the minute. Then all of a sudden, there was a horrifying scream from the other side of the abandoned town. I peered around the cabin and saw Glenn running through the open field. Once he saw me, we both ran into the woods back toward home. Thankfully, we found the trail before the sun fully set, because once the sun went down, we could only see a few feet ahead. When we finally got back, I asked Glenn what happened. He said he was exploring one of the houses, and as he did, he started to realize that it didn't look as abandoned as the others, and someone was likely living there. When he turned to leave, the same man I'd seen was standing on the other side of the cabin, holding a knife. He described his eyes as having a look of hunger, and without hesitation, the man charged at him. Glenn screamed and ran, and I guess the man didn't chase very far. We don't know what that man would have done to us, but it was stupid to have even gone to that abandoned town in the first place. And it almost cost us our lives to figure that out. Last year was my senior year of high school, and my friend group was always full of dumb ideas. All it took was a boring weekend night for us to go out and find anything to entertain us. That's exactly what happened this night. It was me and my two other friends, hanging out and just trying to think of something to do. One of them, Mikey, had been talking of this abandoned place nearby for the past few weeks. We pushed it off for a while, but now with nothing to do, it didn't sound all that bad of an idea to go exploring. He said it was a house on the edge of town where all the farmland was, but aside from the location, that was about all he knew. Me and the other friend shrugged and said why not, and within 15 minutes we were on the road. We drove for a half hour until we reached the point where Mikey said to turn off onto an unpaved road, and a few minutes later we exited the tree line and were right in front of the house. It was a very large house with a huge plot of abandoned farmland around it. We got out of the car and each took a flashlight, then approached the front door. I turned the knob and it was unlocked, but when I tried shoving it open, it was blocked by something heavy on the other side. We went around to the back and tried the back door, but that door was locked. We resorted to crawling through a busted window on the side of the house. As soon as we were in, a strong, awful smell took over. It was like a mixture of mold and rotting animal carcass. I mean, this was the worst smell I'd ever experienced by a long shot. My friends didn't seem as fazed as I was, so we kept moving in. Right away, we noticed footprints all throughout the dusty hallway floors. We thought nothing of it because we figured this place had basically been a tourist attraction for stupid teenagers like us. The whole place was unnervingly empty though. There wasn't any old furniture or garbage on the floor. As we walked through the first few rooms, we reached the hallway that led to the front door, and against the front door was an old couch with a bunch of boxes on top of it. Whoever had done that had taken what looked like everything from inside the house just to block the front door from opening. We continued up the stairs to see if the upstairs rooms were emptied too. At the top of the steps, I shined my flashlight down the hallway. There were 3 doors. We opened the first 2, and they were both empty bedrooms. Then I opened the third, and not surprisingly, it was empty too, but this room was much smaller than the others. The reason this confused all of us was because there were no more rooms next to it. So based on the layout of the house, it was easy to assume that this room was supposed to be double the size of the others, since there were no more doors. With nothing left to see, we started back down the stairs, but as we got halfway down, we all heard the same thing. It sounded like a ball hitting the floor, rolling, then quickly and intentionally being stopped. It came from upstairs where we just were. Cautiously, we checked each of the rooms again and found nothing. All of us hearing the exact same thing made it extra odd because we all knew it happened, but there was nothing upstairs. After that, we were all getting uncomfortable and we quickly left the house through the same window we came in from. We walked to the front where the car was and got in. Just before I pulled out, though, I noticed 2 windows upstairs on the left side of the house, and I specifically remembered that the small room we were confused by only had 1 window. I pointed this out to my friends, and we all sat there, staring at the second floor windows and trying to figure out what was going on. Then there was a sudden flicker of a shadow moving across the blinds, followed by a dim light glowing from behind the window. In the light, the figure of a man could be seen, looking out the window at us. I put the car in drive, did a U-turn, and sped down the dirt road, getting out of there as fast as possible. After some discussion, Mikey convinced us to call the police, but the police found nothing in the house. Whoever was there had moved out and probably took everything with them. When I think back on it now, I'm just happy that we didn't try too hard to search for any more rooms when we were up there. If we did, I wouldn't doubt it if whoever was hiding in there was prepared to take drastic measures not to be found. This happened last summer. I'm a 32-year-old male, and I live alone in an apartment outside of the city. At the time, I'd just moved in and had thrown away a lot of old stuff that I had from my other place, so I was occasionally scrolling through Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace, looking for a few furnishings. The 2 things I needed the most were a coffee table and a TV stand, but I wasn't in too much of a rush, so I didn't mind searching for a couple weeks if I had to. I remember it being a Monday night, and I had just gotten home from work. I was scrolling through some posts on Craigslist at the dinner table and came by a coffee table that I liked. Cheap, not too old, and in good condition. I sent an email and continued scrolling, but not even 20 seconds later, I got an email reply back.
Stuff their stockings with a delicious
The man, Cole, said he could sell it to me, but it had to be tonight because he was moving out and planned to throw it away in the morning. Having nothing else to do that night, I responded, "Sure, just let me know where to pick it up from." He sent over an address, and I did a quick Google search of it. The house was 25 minutes away, in a neighborhood I'd never been to before. I told him to give me an hour, and I'd be there. Although I was tired and it was pretty late, I didn't mind doing a quick pickup. I was also just happy to finally get a coffee table for my living room. I finished eating my meal at the table, then got in my car and started driving there. There was a light drizzle outside, so I was hoping the table wasn't too heavy and we could quickly get it in my car without getting water damage. The drive there felt long, going down some windy roads until ending up in a small, poorly lit neighborhood. By poorly lit, I mean that there were very few streetlights, all being dim, and most of the houses had their lights off. It was late, so I didn't expect everyone to be up at this time, but still, it was a bit creepy. When I found the house, it was a small one-story place, one of the few houses that had its lights on. As I turned into the driveway, I saw a man standing in the corner of the garage, seemingly searching for something. When I put the car in park, the man looked over at me, then quickly ran inside. I waited for a minute, thinking he was gonna come back out, but he didn't. I exited my car and walked into the garage, knocking on the door. Then I knocked again, but nobody was answering. I wasn't sure if I should go to the front door or what, but it was giving me a weird feeling, and I was starting to think of just leaving when the door suddenly opened. It was a different man than I'd seen in the garage, but he introduced himself as Cole. He invited me in to check out the coffee table. I followed him into the living room. The table looked as it did in the pictures and wasn't broken or anything, so I was good to buy it. Cole was making small talk with me, telling me about his new place he just bought, but every time I tried to interrupt and say I'd like to buy the table, he would keep talking. It started to get uncomfortable, standing there listening to him talk over me for 5 whole minutes. It felt like more of a distraction, like he was keeping me there. I finally just cut him off and said I was in a hurry and needed to get home soon. He stopped talking and said I could have it for free. I suspiciously said okay, then asked if he could help me haul it into my car, and we both grabbed it and started walking it through the house. It wasn't super heavy, but it definitely was a 2-person lift. We got it into the garage and set it down for a rest, but right away, I heard someone running up behind me. They came from the side of the house, running up to me wearing a mask and hoodie. I froze up, both scared and confused. The man wasn't very aggressive, and Cole just stood there with a blank face. The man asked for my wallet and phone, holding up a knife at me. I put my hands up, but I really didn't feel threatened enough to comply. He asked again, louder this time, but I took my chances and sprinted for my car. The man lunged at me, but I kept running, getting in and locking the door before they could do anything. I backed out and drove away, and that's when I noticed a cut on my arm that went through my shirt. The man must have slashed me, but in the moment I didn't even notice. I pulled over a few roads down and called the police, providing providing them with an address and description of the two men. To sum it all up, the cops questioned Cole, which was actually his name, and after a brief interrogation, he admitted the masked man was his buddy and they were just trying to rob me with no intention of selling anything. They were both young and it was their first time trying something like this, so I guess they were nervous and that's why it felt so strange. Lucky for me, the cut on my arm wasn't deep at all, not even needing stitches. When it came down to it, they were given a few charges, but nothing too serious. I'm glad I chose to run though, because I worry that if I had let them take advantage and rob me, then they would have had the confidence to continue doing it. After this though, I don't think they'll be trying that again.
Look at this. A Medicare plan with a prepaid card for healthy groceries and other expenses.
Is that from Aetna?
Yeah, why?
I have an Aetna Medicare plan. I get a prepaid card with a monthly allowance I can use on groceries, utilities, and I got to keep my...
I know I'll be criticized for this, but I used to be a frequent user of Craigslist. In my defense, I always met in public places and made sure to talk on the phone and everything before going out and meeting them. For me, it was the easiest place to sell random items around the house or to buy things that would otherwise run my account into the negatives. For years, I had nothing happen at all. I'd met tons of random people and bought or sold more things than I can count. But after this, everything changed. I was searching around for a bicycle and came across a nice one for cheap. Maybe not that nice, but it just looked like a normal bike and was said to still work, which was fine for me. I emailed the person about my interest, and they replied within the hour, saying it was still available for the listed price. We had a quick phone call discussing where and when to meet up, eventually deciding on a gas station that was halfway between both of us. The agreed on time was 6:30. On the day of, I drove out and got to the gas station 15 minutes early. He said he would be driving a blue Chevy truck, so I stayed on the lookout. 30 minutes went by and the man still hadn't shown. The sun was setting and I really didn't want to do the deal in the dark, so I texted him, asking if he was close. A minute later, I got a call.
Sorry, I'm on my way right now. Be there in a few minutes.
Then he hung up abruptly, without letting me say anything. He spoke in a rush, which made it hard to tell if I should be worried about the strange nature of the call, or if he was just trying to get here quickly because he knew he was late. I sat in my car, waiting another 15 minutes for him to finally show up. The truck he drove was really old and beat up, not exactly making me feel good about buying something from him. I got out and greeted him. He was an average height man, wearing baggy clothes, looking around 20 to 30 years old, and for lack of a better word, looked dirty. He had gross hair, and his clothes looked like they'd never been washed. He walked around to his truck bed and opened it, pulling out the bike. Surprisingly, it was in perfect condition. It didn't look like anything fancy, but it was definitely well taken care of, unlike everything else with this man. I did a quick walk around and rode it for a minute, and it was all good. But then I put everything together in my head and instantly lost my excitement. This bike was almost definitely stolen. After seeing the man in his truck, there was just no way this could be his bike. For the bike being at least 5 to 6 years old, there wasn't a single scratch or speck of dirt on it. Once the thought came into my head, I knew I wouldn't feel comfortable buying it unless I was sure it wasn't stolen. tried to be discreet about it and asked,
So, how long have you had it? Few years?
He responded. That gave me nothing, so I asked why he wanted to sell it. Pretty common question, I think, but his response threw me off.
What's it matter? It works, right?
He looked at me with an impatient and rude face. Ironic how he was the impatient one after making me wait for him to show up. I said I no longer wanted it and told him to have a nice night, then went to open my car door. The man was quick to force my door shut before I could fully open it.
Nah, you're buying it. I didn't come out here for nothing.
I knew this was a bad situation, but I saw a few cars and people right by us at the gas station, so I wasn't too worried. I expressed my concerns about where he got the bike from and that I wasn't going to buy what wasn't his. He hesitated, then shoved me against my car and yelled at me to give him the money. He hit me again, and I was forced to pull out my wallet and give him all my cash. He jumped back in his truck and drove off, almost causing an accident on the way out of the gas station. I looked around at the 3 or 4 people who were just standing there watching. Not a single one of them helped me or even stayed to be a witness. Cops never found him, so I was out $100. Not to be that person, but I also kind of lost faith in humanity. No one cared to help me, but they all cared to watch me get beat up and robbed in public. I posted an old laptop for sale on Craigslist a few months back. It worked just fine, but I had to buy a better one for work, and I really had no reason to have 2. I wasn't looking for much. I think I listed it for $80, which was a really good deal. After a few days passed with no responses, I mostly forgot about it, until I checked my emails again a week later and saw I'd gotten a message. They simply said they wanted to look at it and asked if it was still available. I replied, and later that day they got back to me. They said they could swing by tomorrow, and we agreed on 5 o'clock. Later that night, I realized I never got his name. The email address he was sending from was some personal email that looked more like a gamer tag, so it wasn't that helpful. I didn't think too much of it, assuming he just didn't realize what address he was using. On the following day, I reached out and sent him my address a few hours before 5. It was my day off, so I was going to be home all day. Around 4:30, I checked my emails again, but the guy still hadn't responded to my last message. Maybe he didn't feel like it needed to be responded to. I went over and opened the blinds on the window so I could see when he pulled up, then sat on my couch and turned on the TV. I was sitting there for almost an hour, watching TV and glancing out the window every few minutes, but they never showed. Considering our last contact was from yesterday, I figured he had second thoughts and was standing me up. In all honesty, I didn't think that much about it. I just continued watching TV and tried to enjoy the rest of my night as I normally would. By 8 o'clock, I was dozing off on the couch, in and out of sleep, when I woke up to a sound at my back door. After gaining full consciousness, I got up and looked over, seeing nothing out there. I flicked the porch light on just to be sure, but the backyard was empty. The sound I heard was hard to identify because I wasn't even awake, but I thought it was the sound of someone trying to open the door. I went around and made sure all the doors were locked, then checked the windows to see what I could see, until a knock came at the front door. I quietly walked up and looked out the peephole. There was a guy, late 30s maybe, on my porch. He was pacing back and forth and talking under his breath. Then he stopped and came back up to the door and knocked again.
Who is it?
I asked, keeping the door closed and still looking out the peephole. He stared at the door, then said he was trying to talk to the homeowner. The way he said it, with a stutter and slurred words, made it obvious he was on something or wasn't right in the head. I chose not to respond, and once the guy realized this, he called out again, saying he really needed to talk to me. He was pacing again, acting really unsettling. While keeping an eye on him, I took my phone out of my pocket and dialed 911. He knocked again while I was on the phone, but then he ran off the porch toward the garage. I immediately went to get my newer laptop and pulled up the live feed from my security camera that I had just above the garage. On the footage, his car was parked all the way up my driveway, probably just a few inches from touching my garage door, and the guy was using a crowbar to try and wedge the garage open. He looked insane, but it scared the shit out of me. After some failed attempts, the guy went in his car and was shifting around, trying to find something in his glove box, before getting out and hitting my garage with his crowbar, then driving away. Despite providing the security footage showing the man and his car to the police, the guy remains unidentified. It's also unclear if it was related to the Craigslist posting, but I'm convinced it was. I don't know what that guy wanted, or what he would have done had he gotten inside. I'd been a babysitter for years, working with several different companies and hundreds of families. This was just another job on a Thursday night. I drove to the house, getting there exactly on time, and met the parents. They were having a date night at a concert downtown and would be gone for 5 to 6 hours. It was 6:30 already, so this was a late job. They introduced me to their son, Jay, who was 10. He was very talkative and seemed to enjoy my company. When the parents left, he was excited to show me his video games and have me be his audience while he played. He played for around 2 hours before I started getting hungry. I let him continue playing in the living room while I made something to eat in the kitchen. I spent maybe 5 minutes heating up a meal, but then all of a sudden, when I got back, Jay was different. He wasn't talking anymore, and he seemed really shy. I tried starting up conversations, but he would barely respond. I had no idea what happened. I asked him if everything was okay, but he just nodded. I didn't want to be bothering him about it too much, so I pretended like nothing was wrong and watched him play some more. Once 9:30 came around, I told him it was time for bed and made sure he got ready. He was still acting weird, trying to avoid me and delay going to bed for as long as possible. Finally, just before 10, he got in bed. I went downstairs and sat on the couch. I was replaying the whole night in my head, wondering what went wrong, but there really didn't seem to be anything I did. I left him alone for a few minutes while I made food, and then it was like he just flipped a switch. While I was thinking on the couch, I heard Jay upstairs. He was walking down the hallway and then opened a door. I quickly went upstairs to see what he was doing, but he wasn't in the hallway. I opened the door to his room, and there he was, sitting in his bed just as I left him.
What are you doing, Jay?
I asked nicely. He looked scared of me. After no response, I just decided to let it go and began walking out the door. But then he said to me he had to use the bathroom. I said okay and let him go down the hall, but while he was in there, I took a look around his room. It all looked like an ordinary 10-year-old boy's room. Just as I was walking out, I noticed something in the corner of my eye. I looked over, and right by the closet, I could see someone's eye looking back at me through the crack in the door. I hesitated, then walked out of the room and closed the door. I listened and didn't hear any movement in the room. As soon as Jay came out of the bathroom, I told him to be quiet and rushed him downstairs and into my car. I dialed 911, and as we waited for them to show up, I asked Jay if he knew someone else was in the house. He was quiet, not responding to me at all. When the first officer came, he went right inside and caught the man walking around upstairs. He looked like a 30-year-old creep. When questioned, the man said he was a friend of Jay's and that Jay even let him in the house to babysit for the night. Strangely, when the parents got home, they basically pushed me away and didn't give me any more updates on what happened. There was obviously something really weird going on, because Jay was very scared of him. I don't know if they knew each other, or if this was a first-time encounter, but I hope it was all dealt with well by the police. When I was 16, my parents made me get a job. They were tough like that, and made my older brother do the same when he turned 16 as well. He got a job in retail, working as a cashier for some tech shop, but I wanted to do anything other than that. The only thing that caught my attention was babysitting. I had younger cousins that I enjoyed being around, so I thought it wouldn't be so bad. There was a company in my town that I applied for, and after a short interview, they offered me a position. It wasn't a very normal hiring process, at least I don't think. Once hired, they took some pictures of me and had me fill out a bio of who I was. Then they posted me on their website as a babysitter. I waited. A few weeks went by, and still, nobody had booked me. My parents told me to be patient, but I was already looking for other jobs. Until one day, I finally got a notification. Someone booked me for a full night and morning, meaning I would have to spend the night there and continue watching them in the morning. It was on a Saturday, so I didn't have school, but spending the night somewhere else felt strange to me. I arrived at the house at the scheduled time of 10 p.m. I was met at the door by the dad, who invited me in. He was an older man, in his late 50s I bet, but he told me his daughter was only 4 years old. He showed me to the kitchen, where he had me sit at the table with him and talk to me for a good 25 minutes. He asked me all about myself. I wasn't sure if this was normal or not for parents to do when hiring a new babysitter, but I went along with it. At some point, I realized I hadn't met or even seen his daughter yet, so I asked where she was. He said she was upstairs in her room sleeping, and that I wouldn't have to worry about watching her until the morning. Then he got up abruptly and said he had to go, and would be back around 11 tomorrow morning. He stepped out and left me the key to the house. I remember feeling very confused about the whole situation. None of it felt like I thought it would. The first thing I did after he left was walk around the bottom floor. I forgot to ask where I was supposed to sleep, or if there was food for me to make, or any games for us to play. Probably all questions experienced babysitters would have asked right away. As I walked around, I began wondering where all the kids' stuff was. He said his daughter was 4, so I expected a mess of toys all over the house, but there wasn't a single toy in sight. I even checked in a few drawers that looked like they might have some, but there weren't any. The fridge and cabinets didn't seem to have much kid food either. I realized this was off to a really bad start, and I just needed to relax. I decided I would text the dad in the morning and ask him about the food and stuff, but for now I would just make myself a spot on the couch and sleep. I found a blanket and used the couch pillow, then turned off the lights. I tried to sleep for nearly 2 hours, but there was something off about the house that just kept me up. Then, at 1 a.m., I heard something click on the other side of the house. I shot up and looked across the room. The whole house was quiet now. I was sitting up for a minute until I heard the back door softly slide open. My heart was pounding as I got up and went to the hallway that had a clear view of the back door. I was confused to see the dad with his back to me while he was trying to softly close the door behind him. I believe this moment that I had to process everything before he saw me was likely the reason for my escape. As he turned and saw me, I started running for the front door. His footsteps followed behind me, rushing down the hallway and yelling at me to stop. I ran for my car and got in. The dad wasn't far behind, banging on my window as I backed out of the driveway. While running away was a smart decision, the next one wasn't so much. I didn't say anything about what happened. I think I was worried that I had done something wrong or messed up as a babysitter somehow. A month later, though, I finally told my parents, and they said it was too late, but I should have reported it. It was an obvious red flag that the man didn't contact the babysitting company, practically showing that he was guilty of something. I'm sure there was no daughter, and no reason for me to be at his house, other than for some sick plan he had set up for me. I hired a babysitter for my 6-year-old a few months ago. I used a website to hire the same young girl every time because she was familiar with my son already. On this night, though, she wasn't available. I had somewhere to be at 5 and only needed someone to watch my son for a few hours, but there was only one babysitter able to come at that time. It was a 17-year-old boy named Ben, who looked nice in the pictures. I scheduled him to be here at 4:30, then waited. At 4:30, I had my son turn off his video games so that I could introduce them, but Ben still didn't show. I was watching out the windows for his arrival, but at 5, I called the website and asked where he was. They told me he clocked in on their app, supposedly meaning he arrived and was babysitting already. After discussing it a bit more, they canceled it and apologized, but said no one was available to cover for him. I was really angry, being forced to cancel my plans. At 6, I made dinner for myself and my son, and we started watching a show together. In the middle of the episode, there was a knock at the front door. I paused the show and went up to look through the peephole. A guy was on the porch, and I saw his car parked in our driveway as well. I opened the door.
Hi, I'm Ben,
he said. I gave him one of those, "Are you serious right now?" looks.
You're over 2 hours late. Just go,
I said, closing the door in his face. Not the nicest thing to do on my part, but I was honestly even more upset that he chose to show up still. I sat back down and played the show again. After a couple minutes though, I checked the window and saw that his car was still there in the driveway. A cold rush ran through me. I went back to the door and looked out the peephole. It was dark, and at first I didn't see anything, but then, at the very bottom of the peephole, I saw him. He was standing very still, pressed all the way up against the door, like he was listening. I watched him for a few seconds, so creeped out that I was in a state of shock. I must have been visibly so, because my son called out to me in a worried voice. I snapped out of it and backed away, telling my son to go to his room and lock the door. I called the police, but I think Ben heard. He knocked on the front door, then the doorknob rattled, and he banged on the door again. I heard his footsteps move around to a nearby window, followed by him trying to pry it open. I ran around the house to make sure everything else was locked, then joined my son in his room while we waited for the police. 5 long minutes passed before I heard sirens approaching the house. When they pulled up, apparently Ben was sitting in his car, pretending like he was happy to see them. He made up a whole story about me being crazy and said he was just here to babysit at his scheduled time. His lies didn't last after I showed them the confirmation email saying he was supposed to come 2 hours ago. The next few weeks were overcomplicated, but at the end of everything, not much happened. Ben lost his job, but aside from that, nothing else was really done because he denied everything. It's really scary because if he had shown up on time, then I would have left my son alone with him. I don't know what he was trying to do, but I'm glad I didn't have to find out.